everybody and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be sewing my very own tie front top with a gathered peplum and long sleeves. I'm sure you've seen these tops floating about across social media, and I know a lot of other creators have also made videos on how to make this top. These tops are also all over the high street, and while I love the style, I'm still yet to find one that I really like for me personally. I have quite a minimal, neutral style, and a lot of the ones that I'm seeing are patterned, often in gingham and that sort of thing, so I wanted to make something that was a little bit more me. To do this, I'm going to be using my Zoey pattern, and I'll be showing you how I hack that pattern to make this style. Unfortunately, I haven't got around to extending the sizing of the Zoey pattern just yet, so it does only go up to a UK size 18 at the moment. But that being said, you can use most smock style tops or dresses to recreate this style, so you may already have something that works. The general adjustments to this could also be applied to so many other patterns, so you might have something that's not exactly the same style, but that you might want to add ties to the front or add puff sleeves to, or that sort of thing. So, full disclosure, I did actually already film this, but I wasn't really happy with the outcome. Not the outcome of the actual style of the top. I did like that, but I wasn't too happy with the fabric choice. The filming quality wasn't great either, so I just decided to refilm it and make it out of something that I really would wear myself. The fabric choice is an off-white linen mix fabric. I think it's mixed with viscose. It's lovely and crisp, but it does still have a really nice drape to it. A little bit of structure, but mostly it drapes. I think it'll be really nice with some pale blue denim for the spring summer months, and then I also thought it would be really nice just with kind of a black smart pair of trousers to smarten it up for the colder months. Anyway, I'm going to show you now how I adjusted the Zoey pattern. I did the adjustments on paper, but it was a little bit hard to see, so I thought what I would do is draw it out on my iPad and screen record the whole thing so that you can see quite easily where I've made the adjustments. And then you can do that on paper as normal. So we'll get on to adjusting the pattern, and then I will show you how to sew the top. If you are using the Zoey pattern, you will need all pieces from the pattern except the tie piece of the sleeve. We'll start with the back bodice. In this pattern, the back bodice is cut a pair. This is because we have a centre back seam and a keyhole opening at the back neck. We don't need that for the top that we're making. So firstly, we need to remove the 1 cm seam allowance from the centre back. We can also ignore the notch entirely and then simply change this piece to be cut 1 on fold. I then also adjusted my neckline for this. The neckline was a little lower than I wanted it, so I raised the back neckline by 2 cm. To do this, simply follow the centre back line and extend by 2 cm. Create a right angle at this point for about another 2 cm, and then curve this gently into the original neckline. Now that's all the adjustments that we need to make to the back itself, but we do need to create a back neck facing. To do this, measure 6 cm down from your new neckline at various points along the back neck. Match up these points with a smooth line. This section will now be your back neck facing and will follow the same seam allowances as your back bodice. This piece will also be cut on fold. The front bodice also doesn't have many changes and is essentially the opposite to the back bodice. The front bodice for this pattern is cut on fold, and we want this to be cut as a pair. You can simply change the text for this and cut it as a pair. Normally you would also add seam allowance to the centre front, but I want there to be a slight gap anyway, so I'm not going to bother. The only other thing that we will do for the front bodice is raise the neckline, the same way we did for the back bodice, except this time I'm going to raise it by 3 cm. I'm going to be fully lining the front bodice, so we now need to cut 2 pairs or 4 pieces total in this piece. Now, when I originally made this pattern, I wanted to try a different method of creating gathers, and so I only added the excess into the top of the piece, creating this curved shape. It just creates less volume at the hem. However, I think a straight gathered piece works better, so I'm going to change these pieces for a straight gathered pattern piece. First, take your front peplum piece and measure the longer curved edge of the pattern. This will be the width of your new gathered panel. Then measure the shorter straight edge. This will be the length of your new gathered panel. Create a rectangle using these measurements, add your grain line and pattern information back to the piece, remembering we will now also be cutting this front piece as a pair rather than on fold. Repeat the same steps for your back gathered peplum piece, remembering that this piece will now be cut on fold instead of a pair, the same as the back bodice. For the ties, I created a pattern piece as there isn't one in the Zoey. I made a simple rectangle at 4 cm by 32 cm, and I'll need to cut 6 of these. You may want to adjust the length of ties depending on your preference, but this will create a similar length tie to my top. Lastly, we have the sleeve. In the Zoey pattern, this piece is split into 2 and there is a notch on the seam that joins the pieces, but we don't need this for the new top, so we're just going to join them and create the puff sleeve. Draw in your 1 cm seam allowance along each edge and then cut the seam allowance off and join the 2 pieces. The joining line will be your new shoulder point, so mark that in with a notch. Now we have a simple sleeve piece and we want to slash and spread this to create the volume we want. I only want a small puff sleeve, so I'm not going to add loads, but you can add more or less if you want to. Everything to the left of the shoulder notch will treat as the front sleeve, and everything to the right of the shoulder notch will be our back sleeve. You can tell which is which by the double notches on the right side indicating the back. We want to make sure that we add the same volume to the front as we do the back, so I will first work on the front sleeve, then repeat these steps on the back. I'm going to draw vertical lines down the sleeve at even intervals away from the shoulder point. Then I'll cut up the lines and spread the pieces horizontally apart from each other at even intervals. I'm going to start by drawing my first line 1.5 centimeters away from the center line, and then I'll draw another 2 lines 1.5 centimeters away from each other. Label each section 1, 2, 3, 4 so you know which order they go in. Cut along each line you drew on the sleeve, then spread the pieces apart by 1 centimeter at each interval. Stick the pieces onto a new piece of paper, making sure that the bottom straight edge of the sleeve stays straight. Once you've done this, repeat these steps on the back side of your sleeve. You can see now the pattern piece has been spread apart evenly and the shoulder point hasn't moved. We now just need to true up the top edge, which just means drawing a new shoulder head following the previous lines as much as possible. They won't match up perfectly, so just create a smooth curve as close as you can, then redraw your notches if needed. Our sleeve length currently sits just above the elbow. Determine how much length you want to add, including a couple of centimeters extra for your cuff elastic. Measure down this amount and draw a horizontal line. Then draw straight down from the underarm points to the hem. You don't need to follow the shaping of the sleeve here, as we are adding volume anyway and the cuffs will be elasticated. Our pattern is now adjusted to the style we need and we can move on to making it. So cut out all your pieces as detailed on the screen and then we'll move on to sewing. Okay, so now you should have your 6 tie strap pieces, your front and back gathered peplum, your back piece, one of these cut on fold, and then your back neck facing, one of these cut on fold, and if you're using interfacing, cut some of that as well. I'm personally not, just because my interfacing is quite heavyweight. Well, it's a medium weight, but this fabric, I don't think it'll work with that. I need a lightweight, but I don't have one, so I'm not going to, but normally I would. Then you should have your front pieces and you should have 4 of these, so 2 cut as a pair. I say that because if you're using a printed fabric, you want 2 pieces mirrored, then 2 pieces mirrored again, so 4 total. And then 2 sleeve pieces, and then that is all your pieces ready to go. And we're going to start with the straps. Okay, I'm trying to balance you onto another machine, so I don't know how well this is going to work, but here we have our tie straps, and what we want to do is we want to fold. I've cut mine right on the raw edge, which is absolutely fine because we're going to fold this in, but we want to fold the top bit over by 1 centimeter to the wrong side of the fabric, like so. Then we want to take the entire length of the strip and fold it with right sides together, and then we're going to sew 1 centimeter away from the folded edge the whole way down the strip. Here is what I have. You can see here just about, hopefully you can see the stitching. I folded top over and I've sewn the entire way along the length, and I've back stitched at the beginning and the end. Now what I'm going to do is trim this seam allowance to about halfway and then repeat on all other straps. Now the straps are all done and we need to turn them through, and I'm going to use this loop turner. I'll link one in the description below, but this is my favourite tool for turning through straps. So I'm going to make sure I trim all of my seam allowance down and then I'm going to turn them through using this, but you can use whatever you want to use. Okay, so they're finally done, and here we have our straps. Now you have a raw edge here, and then you have the edge that you turned under. I normally just get my little scissors and just poke the end in if it's poking out a little bit, like so. And then I might just pop a couple of hand stitches just on the end just to close that hole up. So I've got 6 of those. I'm going to press them all and then move on to the front of the top. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to my front pieces, and I've got 4 of these. So 2 of them are lining, so I'm going to put them aside, and 2 of them are my main fabric. So the first thing that I want to do is determine where I want my straps to be. And I'm going to put 2 at the top, 2 at the bottom, and 2 in the center. Now, when I tried this top last time, the center was just slightly higher than my bust, so I'm going to go slightly lower than center. So I'm going to put the first strap 1 centimeter away from the top, because we're going to sew this edge, so you want enough room for seam allowance. So about 1 centimeter or just over away from the top, and you want your raw edge of your strap to align with the front of the bodice. And same again, the bottom one is also going to be 1 centimeter away from the bottom, because I will be sewing gathers onto the bottom. And then I've done the same for the other side, and I'm going to pin all of those in place and then sandwich my lining straight on top. So I'm going to take my lining pieces, and with right sides together, I know it's a bit hard to see because this fabric looks the same on both sides, but with right sides together, I'm going to place my lining pieces on top, and then I'm going to pin them in place. Okay, so now all my straps are pinned in place and they're even on both sides. Now I'm going to sew using a 1 centimeter seam allowance all the way up this edge and all the way around the neckline edge on both sides. That will sandwich our straps in place and neaten the neckline. Okay, so I've sewn around the top and I've sewn around the front edges. I'm just going to trim this corner ever so slightly, turn through to the right side and press in place. Trim the corner. So we've got our front pieces all done, our ties are attached. Now we're going to just put that aside for a second and we'll move on to our back piece. So the back piece is really simple. Obviously it's creased in the middle because it's linen and I folded it there. Back piece is really simple. It's just 1 piece and a facing. So with right sides together, we need to match up our facing to our neckline and then pin in place like so. And then we're going to sew just along the neckline edge. So now that has been attached to the top at the neckline, we want to press the facing away from the top, and then we want to understitch. And what that is sewing the seam allowance onto the facing. So if we start here, we'll press our facing away. Our seam allowance will be on the facing side, and then we'll sew as close as we can to the edge on the facing side. Now I don't always press it first. I like to sew it and then press it afterwards. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now and then show you what I did. Okay, so here is my back neck facing, and I have just stitched right on the edge there on the facing side. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to neaten this edge, this long edge here of the facing, and I'm going to overlock that, and then I'm going to turn it. I'll show you now. So this is the wrong side here, and then what I'm going to do is turn it to the wrong side like so, and then press it along this edge all the way so it's nice and neat, and the inside will have a facing. So now you can see here I have pressed this to the wrong side of my back. So here's my seam allowance, this is the wrong side of my back piece. And now we want to attach our front to our back. So pin our front to our back with right sides together at the shoulder seams, but we're only going to pin the actual shoulder seam at the back. We're going to move the facing out of the way, and we're only going to pin the right side. We're not going to pin the lining, we're just going to pin the right side. I'll show you close up. So here we have our facing pulled out of the way, and here we have our back shoulder. Now we want to attach just the right side of our front shoulder on here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to attach the lining shoulder onto the back neck facing like so. So I'll pin it in place. Now you'll sew that entire seam with a 1 centimeter seam allowance and overlock it. And then when it comes back, it will be something like this. We'll be able to fold it back and everything will be neat and tidy. You'll see in a second once I've done it. So I'll do this side and then I'll show you. So you'll have something that looks like this. So Here we have the seam that we continue to follow through, and then we'll put our facing and our lining, we'll put our back neck facing and our front lining back to the wrong side of the fabric. These seams now, if we press them towards the back as they're meant to be, so we'll press our seam allowances to the back, and then we'll pin in place along here, and then we'll turn it to the right side, and from the right side you can see everything's nice and enclosed, and we'll stitch in the ditch on the right side just to hold them together. But that creates a nice neat facing, and it means that here is completely smooth. So I'm going to repeat this for the other side, and then I'm going to stitch in the ditch along the shoulder seams, and then we'll move on to the side seams. Okay, so I have done the shoulders and they look a little bit like this on either side, nice and neat and tidy. And now we need to finish the side seams. Now you can do this either, like whichever way you want to do it. You can literally, with right sides together, treat your front lining and main fabric as one and simply sew the front and back together at the side seams and overlock if you wish. Or you could French seam it. I think I'm actually going to French seam mine because I think that will look quite nice. Normally you would sew your seams right side together, but for French seam you start with wrong sides together. So I'm going to treat all three pieces as one. So I'll just do one side for now, but I'll pin the wrong sides together, and then I'll sew using 1/2 centimetre seam allowance, and then I'll cut back the seam allowance, turn it round and sew again from the right side. So I'm going to go over and do that, see how it works on one side, then do the other side. Okay, so this is where we're at, and the side seams are done. The French seam actually looks really nice and neat. If I go far back, you can see there and there the French seams are nice and neat. I think if I was to make this top again, instead of overlocking this edge, I'd put some sort of binding or double turn it, maybe do like a rolled hem on the edge. Because the overlocking looks a little bit messy. I mean, my overlocker did have a little bit of a moment on here, but I think if that was nice and neat as well, that would look really nice. But I've already sewn it in at the corner now, so I can't really do that without unpicking, but for next time, that's what I'll do. Okay, so now it is time to attach the front and back gathers. I'm going to attach the front pieces to the back pieces, and I'm going to French seam them in the same way that I did on the top. I actually realised I just made a mistake, and the last time that I made this, I specifically didn't French seam it because then I could insert my gathered pieces in between the lining and main layer of the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to French seam these, and then I'm actually going to attach the gathers in a French seam as well, because I don't want overlocking peeking out here at the front edge. So I'm going to do it like that, and it will hopefully work. But next time, I think I'm going to do it a slightly different way. But for now, this will be absolutely fine. So I'm going to sew my front to my back at the side seams using a French seam, and then I'm going to gather up the entire edge to fit onto the top. So I have done my French seams and attached my gathered panel front to my gathered panel back on both sides. But I realised before I gather them, I need to neaten the front edge. So for the front edge, I'm simply going to turn, and then sew. So I'm just going to do a double turn along the front edge of each piece just to neaten that front edge so that when I attach it to the top, that edge isn't raw. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to gather the top edge. I'm not going to show you how to do gathers purely because it would make the video so long. So if you do want to see how to do gathers, please let me know in a comment down below and I'll do a video on that as well. So here I am just having my coffee break, and I spilt it on my machine as well. And do you know what's so annoying is where's the seam? There's the seam. It's smack bang in the middle of my gathers. How annoying is that? Do you know what I might actually do though, is should I recut it, or should I just try and hide it? I think I'm gonna have to recut that. It's so big and it's on white linen and it's coffee that I think I'm actually gonna have to redo that. I think I can get away with reusing the back pieces though. I'll just unpick the French seam. But how annoying. Being completely honest though, it serves me right for drinking coffee at my machine, because this has happened before and it was a worse scenario than this, and I said I wouldn't drink coffee or tea at my machine anymore, and here I am doing that, so serves me right really. By the way, this is one I made yesterday. Okay, so I have sewn up the gathered piece. The front edges are neatened, and I'm going to attach this to the top. So I'm going to adjust the gathers onto the top to make sure it fits. Make sure that my side seams of my front and back gather are attached to the side seams of the top. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do it as a French seam again. So what I will do is I will sew wrong sides together, trim the seam allowance, that's my iron turning off. Yeah, I'm going to attach the gathers to the top, right sides together all the way along the bottom, trim the seam allowance, and then turn it and sew the seam again with the fabric right sides together. Then what I'll probably do is neaten the hem by doing a double turn again, the same way I did on the front edges of this gathered panel, and then it's onto the sleeves. So this is where we're at so far. But yeah, and then here is my French seamed gathers. They look lovely, but yeah, they're just a bit annoying to do. So I'm going to hem the peplum, and then I'm going to insert the sleeves. Okay, so here we have our sleeve, and we want to fold it in half with right sides together and match up this underarm seam here. We want to sew that using a 1 centimeter seam allowance and then overlock or zigzag stitch to neaten. But because I've been doing French seams, I might as well carry on with the underarm seam. So I'm going to do my wrong sides together, then right side to create my French seam. Press that to the back. The back is the side with the double notch here. Do that on both, and then we'll add some elastic into the hem, puff the sleeve, and then attach it into the top. Okay, so here we have our sleeves, and I've sewn up my underarm seam with a French seam, and now we need to do this bottom edge. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to turn it to the wrong side by 1 centimeter, like so, and then stitch that in place, and then I'm going to turn it by just over 1 centimeter and stitch that in place, leaving a gap for the elastic. Now the reason I sew it just over 1 centimeter is because my elastic is 1 centimeter wide. Yeah, just give it a little bit of wiggle room. So yeah, fold it, stitch in place, fold again, stitch in place, leaving a gap. And then I'm gonna work out what I want the elastic to be on my wrist, and then feed the elastic through. And then that'll be the cuff sorted. Right, so this is my second row stitch in here, and then I've left a gap to insert my elastic here. There's 2 rows of stitching on the inside because obviously I stitched that last one, but on the outside there's just 1 neat row of stitching and then a gap. So what I'm going to do is take my elastic, and then I'm going to wrap it around my arm, mark just with my finger where it meets, and that is the measurement of my wrist. And then I'm going to add seam allowance at about 2 centimeters, and then I'm going to cut 2 of them, 1 for each arm obviously, and then feed that through the gap that I left in the sleeve cuff. So I'm going to use my bodkin for this. These are such a handy little tool. Instead of using a paper clip, this is what a safety pin, this is what I use. So I just attach it on. The only thing is with sleeves and cuffs like this, sometimes the bodkin's a little bit too long. Like if you're doing quite small cuffs. So in some cases a safety pin is better, but I hate when a safety pin comes undone. This can still come undone, but not as often. So then I'm just gonna literally lay one end on top of the other and sew that in place. Like so. I actually just do 2 straight rows and then just backstitch a few times on each. So now that's inserted, and I just want to finish off my hole here. And there we have our final, this is from the wrong side, but there we have our final cuff. I'm going to do the same for the other one, and then we'll insert our sleeves. So both of our sleeves are now finished, the cuffs, I mean. done both of them, and I'm now going to get them attached into the top. So in order to do that, I need to change my stitch length. This is the same way that you would do gathers, but I'm going to change my stitch length to 5. And then here is my sleeve head. I've turned this sleeve right side out now, so there's the inside. And what I'm going to do is, leaving long tail ends at the beginning and end, I'm going to start at these notches and I'm going to sew all the way around to about the same on the other side and leave long tail threads again. And then what I'm going to do is gather up the sleeve head just enough so that it fits into the sleeve. Match up, this is my shoulder notch, so I'll match up my shoulder notch, I'll match up my other notches and then sew it in with a normal stitch length. So I've left loose threads at the end and I'm not going to back stitch, I'm just going to sew all the way around. And then I'm going to stop at my back notches, leave long tail ends of thread again, and I've left tail ends of thread here. And what I'm going to do is pull on the top thread, so the thread that's on the right side of the fabric, and just gather up the sleeve. It doesn't need to be loads because I haven't put loads of gathers in the sleeve, but just gather it up to what you think looks about right, and then you can adjust it when it's in the sleeve. So I want my sleeve right side out and I want my top wrong side out, and then I'm going to go up through the cuff of my sleeve just so I can hold it from the inside. And then I'm going to slip my sleeve up inside the top and match the underarm seam of the sleeve with the underarm seam of the top. And I want my back notches of my top and my sleeve to match up. So if they don't, you've got your sleeve in the wrong side. So I had my sleeve in the wrong side. So I'm going to go back up into the other side and I'm going to match up the underarm seam. So I'm going to pin my underarm seams. Then I'm going to go into the puff and I'm going to find that shoulder seam, so the central, the shoulder notch, sorry, the central notch. And then I'm going to match that up with the shoulder seam, and then I'm going to pin that in place. And then I'm going to match up, move my tail end of thread out the way, match up my double notch, and then basically match up your other notches if you have any to match up. And if it's not quite right, you can remove some gathers, you can add some more gathers. Just make sure you're always pulling on the thread that's on the right side of the fabric so you don't get knotted. So can you see there, my sleeve is pinned inside. Here is the underarm seam or the side seam of my top. And then on the other side is the underarm seam of my sleeve. So right sides of the top and sleeve are together. I'm now just going to sew all the way around this sleeve head using my normal stitch length. So I'm going to change it back to a 2.5 stitch length and go all the way around this circle. Then I'm going to overlock that, and that is basically the sleeve done. One last thing to mention is you want most of your gathers in this top section. You don't want your gathers around this part of the armhole because you want it to puff at the top, at the shoulder. You don't want it past your top 3 notches really. And once you've sewn it, you can also pull out your gather stitches. Just make sure that you pull them out on the right side of the fabric using the thread that you'd already pulled along. So I'm going to pull those out and then I'm going to overlock that sleeve opening. And that's your top all done. I completely forgot to film an outro for this video, so I hope you enjoyed seeing this top being made. Don't forget to leave a comment if there's anything else you want to see from me, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.